This is Keys to the Shop, episode 429, Believing Success is Possible with Michael Ryan of Threadbare Coffee Consulting. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DiFirio, and I'm your host for the show. I'm always excited to have you along, and I would really encourage you to subscribe to the show. That way you'll be always updated with new content as it comes out on your podcast player. You'll never miss any of the great content and the interviews such as today's that will help change your perspective and change your actions and therefore change your business, your career, and maybe even your life, And so stay subscribed to Keys to the Shop and also pay it forward a little by sharing these episodes on social media. Let people know who follow you or your peers about the show so that they too can partake in the rich tapestry of wisdom that is represented in the interviews and topic studies that we do in Keys to the Shop. So thank you very much, everybody, for doing that. Now, beyond the podcast, Keys to the Shop is also a consulting and coaching company working one-on-one with coffee shop entrepreneurs just like yourself to help you build a thriving coffee shop and find joy in the process of achieving excellence in quality, in operations, and with your people. And so if you're interested in that and want to talk more and have a free 30-minute discovery call conversation, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS at keystotheshop.com. And that would be really amazing to get to talk with you, see where you're at, and how Keys to the Shop Consulting might be able to help you. Now, if you're looking for game-changing technology to help you achieve a new level of service to your customers, then you have to look at the Ground Control Cyclops Brewer from Voga Coffee. The Ground Control Cyclops Brewer for many years now has been upending what we've known about what's possible with batch brew coffee. The SCA award-winning technology allows you to gain control over an incredible depth and range of flavors in coffees and offer that next level quality. But not only that, this machine makes tea, batched iced lattes, batched cold brew, so the extraction potential is off the charts. It opens up new avenues of profitability and efficiency for you and your team. So go ahead and check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee to learn more about this amazing piece of equipment that's really built in service and for the love of coffee and all that it can achieve. Again, if you're interested in leveling up your quality and having more efficiency and more profitability channels, go ahead and check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. And, the thing about working in coffee is that you meet people where they are, in different times of their day and different capacities. And, the people have different restrictions in terms of diets, and the way that things work these days is that the plant-based options in our cafes, they've proliferated so much. It's just common, and it outpaces regular milk in many cases. And so you want to choose something for your customers that is in service to them and it helps connect with them and create a great experience. And choosing something like the Barista Series from Pacific is going to really help you achieve that. The Barista Series is a line of plant-based performance beverages designed for baristas and tested by and approved by baristas all over the world before it even hits the shelves. And so it stands up to the heat from steaming. It has great silky texture. This helps you with latte art in these plant-based beverages. And the final flavor is really focused on the coffee. So there's a lot of balance there. And this is really important when we are talking about consistency in the coffee shop for this daily affordable luxury that we offer. So go check them out at pacificfoodservice.com. Get samples, try it for yourself. If you're looking for the best plant-based beverages to serve your guests, then I would recommend using the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, today I'm really excited to present to you a conversation with somebody who, as a fellow consultant and coach, I greatly, greatly respect. If you land with Threadbare Coffee Consulting with Michael Ryan, you will be in good hands. This man is someone who I've known and have called a friend for over 10 years, and happy to get him on the show to talk about some really interesting aspects of the work that he does in coaching and consulting, and some of the key points that he drives home with his clients and people in the small group coaching programs that he offers that really changes how they are able to achieve success and freedom and find joy in coffee shop ownership. And Michael is somebody who I've respected for quite a while. He is a published author, international speaker, a certified business coach. He is a licensed Q grader, SCA certified instructor. He's even a level 1 wine sommelier. The man just is accredited. Let's say that. He is a certified health and wellness coach as well. He has over 13 years of experience in the coffee industry, which has included working everywhere from headquarters of Starbucks to local coffee companies. He spent 8 years as the operations manager for a multi-location cafe and roastery that was doing $5 million plus in annual revenue. And through Threadbare Coffee Consulting, Michael has been working with clients, doing trainings, coaching, consulting. His clients have included startups, importers, roasters, cafes, and companies doing all of the above. And so Michael is quite an expert in building healthy cafes and roasteries. And ultimately, what this is all about is building a healthy cafe and roastery business that takes great care of people, starting with the owner. And that's really the bit that we focus on in this conversation here is we start with the person and how, Michael has derived, this kind of a focus with his consulting and why it matters what you believe is possible for your business. And we get into the psychology of the owner's mind. We talk about leadership. We talk about buy-in from staff. We talk about how you can create balance and also take action and having a path forward. If you feel like things are overwhelming right now and you need guidance, this is one of those conversations where we're kind of exploring that very subject, especially again around the idea of how we can achieve a belief in what is possible rather than giving up hope that it's impossible. And this is something that Michael thrives on. It's one of the reasons why I consider him a kindred spirit in the world of training and coaching and consulting. So it's an honor to have him on the show, and I hope you get a lot out of it. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with Michael Ryan of Threadbare Coffee Consulting. Michael, welcome to Keys to the Shop. It is really awesome to have you on the show.
Man, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invitation.
I've known you for, it feels like, has it been over 10 years?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. I knew of you before I knew you because of Tarek Rock and teaching latte art at Coffee Fest.
Yes.
When I stepped into that in 2014.
Yes.
Your fingerprints were all over that. So even though our paths hadn't officially crossed, I was still getting lots of stories from Tarek and other people. So yeah, Coffee Fest and latte art. But yeah, 2014, I think.
And you and I had been roommates at Coffee Fest, for a while.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but now that you said,
and the reason I'm bringing it up is because, we talk about coffee and stuff like that. But one of the things I was most impressed by is you are very studious. You're very disciplined as a person. And while, I might have some ridiculous diatribe about, something related to coffee, you're always really a pondering person. And you're reading before bed. Here's the thing. I always was thinking, man, there is just a lot of wisdom in Michael. And so to see where you've gone in your career with building Threadbare and the people that you're helping through the coaching and the consultation and all of that, to me, it fits perfectly for who you are. So I just wanted to mention that because people need to know.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I do that because I feel like I'm behind. When I see you, I see like wisdom fully embodied, and I'm like, I got to catch up. I got to read these books. I got to study. Yeah, I feel I've always felt like, oh man, Chris is so much further along than I am. I gotta get going if I'm gonna.
Maybe just in age, but well, let's talk a little bit about where you did come from, because you got a lot of things going on with Threadbare right now. And someone who we're going to be interviewing actually later on today, Maxwell Mooney, just joined up the team. and frequent guest on the show through Founder Friday, talking about spreadsheets and other things. But the audience you're helping is, this audience. This is the coffee shop, the business owners that need help to have thriving businesses. But you've come from, firsthand observation and years of training and leadership. Tell us a little bit about how you've developed through the industry.
I'll do the short version. I like to think of the story in three main chapters. The first chapter was a passion for coffee. The second chapter is more of a passion for people. And the third chapter was more of a passion for business. And now what I do is like a intersecting Venn diagram of those three things. Because if you put a love for coffee, a love for people, and a love for business in a pot together, you get cafe and roastery owners who need help, and who need help specifically with the business side of things. But the passion for coffee, kind of the chapter one, was an accident. I studied mechanical engineering and Spanish in college, but in 2009, I just needed a job. And I had heard Starbucks is a good place to work. So I applied. It was in the days of paper applications. So I filled out one paper application, photocopied it, filled in the one blank spot, the location I was applying to. And then I rode my bike all over downtown Portland, Oregon, and applied, I think, to 40 different Starbucks in one day. And one of them called me back. But it happened to be the one that had the Clover machine. So if you remember the days of the Clover brewer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the Clover brewer appealed to my mechanical engineering brain. I would have been a terrible engineer, but there was still part of my brain that worked that way. And it was unique because the coffee they sent us was a freshly roasted, which if you know Starbucks, that's unique. It was a lightly roasted. So again, unique. And it was a naturally processed Ethiopia, of course, as is the case with so many people. And when I tasted that on the Clover brewer, I was a goner. I was done for. I spent hours and hours and hours that night looking up the Clover brewer. How does it work? That kind of stuff. So even moving to Seattle to work at the Starbucks headquarters, going on to create a training program for Roy Street Coffee and Tea, their kind of unbranded pilot program, and then eventually Cafe Ladro, I kept running into kind of a blocker in terms of like, I could know all there is to know about coffee, let's say. I'm not saying I do. I've started to feel like I could, but if I don't care for people, if I'm not passionate about people and better understand how they work. And this is one of the things I love about listening to you speak, is I always learn something about people, especially how they think, how to best be with them. I still think of your analogy of the wedding ring on the head. Yeah. Yes. The when you pat your child on the head with the hand that has the wedding ring on it, it can hurt them, and it doesn't matter if you meant to. It can. And that burden of leadership. Anyway, it's one of the reasons I love listening to you speak at Coffee Fest or on the podcast. But that gave birth to a passion for people, trying to better understand them. Again, I felt a little behind, so I was like constantly reading books on trying to understand these mysterious people. But then yes. Getting married and moving back to Portland and working at Dapper and Wise for 8-ish years, one of the things I realized is that people can't really flourish if the business is not healthy. And so all I could know about coffee, all I could know about people, I started to learn about business, which for me is like the opposite of where I came from. My brother is a natural entrepreneur. I think when he was like 3 years old, he's like, I want to start a business and I don't care what it is. Cool, man. Mm-hmm. That's not me.
Yeah.
But I started to become passionate about that because of what I was seeing. And it was not every business, but a lot of coffee businesses where the people just weren't flourishing because of super simple, like structural deficits in the business, things that were just kind of accidentally built slightly off, kind of like a house.
Yeah.
But can you imagine a house that every time you leave, it falls over? In a house context, we would all say, well, that's not okay. But in coffee, we go, oh, that's just what it is.
Yeah.
Owner takes a day off and the business falls apart. That just is what it is. I'm like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that's a red flag. I think even if I don't know, wouldn't it be better if it stayed standing so you could take a day off? Wouldn't that be nice? And so that's where I landed.
That's like a codependent relationship, isn't it?
It is actually. That's a great way of putting it. And so, yeah, a healthy coffee business is embodied by healthy interdependence, like okay individually, but better together is how I think of interdependence in a healthy way.
Oh yeah.
Like the business can survive the owner being gone, but it's also great when the owner is there. It's not an either or false dichotomy type situation where it's like either the owner is 100% there 24/7 or they're this absentee owner playing golf and riding around on their yacht. I mean, I know owners that do that, but
yeah, if you're a real successful owner, you're playing golf on your yacht. That's what I think.
I want to get to like a little driving range. I don't do golf. Is driving range? Is that correct? Is that the correct term?
As far as I know, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's the epitome. That's what I'm going for. That's the mission of Threadbare Coffee Consulting. Buy Michael a yacht with a driving range on it or whatever.
Yeah, we'll end the conversation right here. I have a question. Let me ask about this idea of the business falls apart without me. I have to be there all the time. And this is the refrain you hear. You and I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
And it is not malicious. It's not it's not usually like because nobody knows what they're doing. Sometimes it's like that, but other times it just feels like that's the way I care for my business and that's the way I care for my people. Why is that faulty thinking? That's
such a good question. And somebody actually messaged me on TikTok a couple months ago because I had mentioned something along these lines, and they said, yeah, but it's really hard if you care. And I know it's social media, I know it's TikTok, but that cut me a little bit because I was like, I think that's part of why this is so hard. The human brain is a fascinating organism, but it's very energy hungry. About 30% of the calories we burn each day is just our brain.
Yeah.
So sitting here having a conversation, we can still burn 30% of our total calories together here, even though we're not being super physically active. Well, one of the things that the brain will do is it'll often collapse things that are not the same. They'll collapse. Oh, this feels pressing, so it must be priority. No, those are just two separate things. I'm working really hard. I'm putting in a lot of effort, so I must be effective. No, effort and effectiveness are separate things. Caring and presence are not the same thing. And as maybe an analogous example to make it a little bit more clear would be like, if I said, I care so much about Annabelle that I never leave her alone.
This is your daughter.
Annabelle's my daughter, yeah. So Annabelle's 17 months old. That actually kind of tracks, right? I care so much about Annabelle, I never leave her alone. Okay. But Christina is here. Can Christina care for her while I'm up here talking to you? I hope so. That would be healthy. Christina's my wife, by the way, for those who are listening. But also, fast forward a couple of years, I care for Annabelle. She's 18. I care for her so much I can't leave her alone. It doesn't track. And it's partially because caring and presence are not one and the same thing. Often I think our brains collapse those. They kind of put them in a blender and mix them together. If we think about them separately, it becomes pretty clear that one of the best ways to care for people is to build something that doesn't require your presence 100% of the time. Like I said, interdependence, okay without you, better with you.
The goal is not to be absent as a form of proof that you have a business that can run without you. Like, see, I can be gone for a year and it's still there.
Yeah.
Like in your analogy here, it would be wrong for you to just check out of your daughter's life when she turns 18. It's just a different way of showing up.
Absolutely. That collapsing I mentioned is one of the ways the brain saves energy. This other way is false dichotomy thinking, and it's extreme either or statements. Either I'm there 24/7 or I'm an absentee owner and there's no in between. That's not real, but it is a way the brain will try to save energy. Oh, it's either this one extreme or there's this other extreme, nothing else. So when I say like the ability to step away, I'm talking about something that's in the middle, but I'm also looking for something that's a level above. So it's a little bit more like the apex of a triangle. If you do decide to upload this video style, then this will make more sense. But on this line, the spectrum of like two extreme options, I'm talking about something that's in the middle, but also a level above. So more like a triangle. So that strategic absence in moderation of like, hey, I'm going to take a day off. I'm going to even take 2 days off. I'm going to have a weekend as a way to reverse engineer how to take even better care of people. It always comes back to taking care of people. But one of the things I feel like owners accidentally forget is you're a person. A healthy coffee business takes great care of people. You're a person too, though. Like we can't exclude you, just like we wouldn't exclude the baristas. We wouldn't exclude the producers. We're not trying to exclude anybody from that statement, but the owners oftentimes kind of exclude themselves on accident without realizing it.
There is a nobility that is a bit of a toxic nobility where they say, we need to fall on the sword for the business. We need to just destroy ourselves, and in so doing, almost expect others to do the same thing. There's a lot of enmity between staff and ownership because both groups, or factions, as it turns out sometimes, are trying to survive each other. It seems like maybe that thinking of just rampant presence for the sake of presence is not just an ownership thing, it's a managerial thing, it's a leadership thing. So if that is not the answer, and absenteeism, of course, is not the answer, what is the answer?
With something like this, it is a little bit easier to start with what it's not and reverse engineer what it might be, because specifically what it might be is going to be slightly different for each person. And just for one example to try and, Maxwell knows this, I tend to be a little bit philosophical, but it means I have to be intentional to bring it back down to earth. So I was working with one owner, and conversation after conversation, trying to get a sense of where did they really want to be in the business. And there was enough people, there was another owner, there was enough moving around that it was actually an option for them to like slide into the slot they would most like to be in, at least a good portion of the time. Turns out they just want to pull shots on bar. And I was like, okay, so that level of involvement and presence it's going to be different if that's what they really miss doing. I'm not opposed to that in terms of like, if that's life-giving for the owner. If it's been long enough, you might need to be retrained so that you don't do things different from the current staff. You might need to submit yourself to the mantle of the current store trainer or whatever.
Don't piss people off to realize your dream.
So that it can backfire. But the point of that particular story was that their level of involvement, or the way that involvement looked, was very specific to them. I heard a mentor say to me a couple of years ago, Michael, you can't break yourself to fix a broken world. And that sort of toxic nobility, or that unnecessary martyrdom, that can't be what it is. It's just like being on an airplane, and they always say, and I find this fascinating, federal law requires you to put your mask on first and then help other people. Yeah, federal law what? Because if you pass out, not only can you not help other people, you're actually in the way. You become a liability if you pass out.
Your body.
And it's the same. Yeah, you're just dead weight. And now you're in the exit row or emergency row, and you're actually in people's way. So that can't be what it is. And that ends up being a little bit different for each person. A lot of the people I work with are both cafe and roastery owners. So a lot of owners, their dream is for the cafes to run themselves more day to day, and their presence to be largely in the roastery. That's possible, but it's possible, but it doesn't mean you just get to go there and leave the cafes floundering. A healthy business takes great care of people, and a usually healthy structure, healthy systems, healthy standard operating procedures is what makes that possible.
Yes.
The scaffolding, the structuring holds the space that you once held physically.
Yeah. One of the things that's true, and you see this at Coffee Fest a lot, especially if you do anything where people get into conversation. So you've led lots of classes, and people will talk to each other, and sometimes they'll help each other with their own perspectives on either business or the technique that they're using for coffee or latte or something.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because a podcast like this one, for instance, is just tapping into the already existing solutions that are out there. And I find for most owners, when you really get into a conversation with them, they've got the standard operating procedures already up there. It's the stuff that they're doing, but it's a matter of just getting it into a format. There's so many places to go, and where do I start, and that kind of thing. But it is possible to do it. And you mentioned something in kind of your philosophy on these things, that oftentimes what drives people is the belief that you can't do these things. But it is possible to do. People have done it. You're a person, and ergo, next step. So how do you get people over the hump of going from one belief to the other?
Yeah. Such a good question. I literally was reading a book last night, and ironically, this is not a book about coffee, but the first chapter, the first line was, if you're going to do this, first thing is you have to believe it's possible. And I was like, what? That's literally what I just sent Chris in my email. And part of the trouble is I get on a lot of free strategy calls with folks who are thinking about opening a cafe, a lot of free strategy calls with people who have already opened their cafe, multiple cafes, even their roastery. What's fascinating to me is I'm often the very first person to tell them it's possible to build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people. At that point, if I'm the first person to say that, I don't worry too much about changing their mindset. I think I'm viewing myself a little bit more as a gardener right now, in terms of like my primary responsibility is planting seeds, like, and maybe even it's just casting seeds, like just tossing it out and seeing where it'll take root and tossing it out there. But I was on a free strategy call a couple of months ago, and the person was thinking about, they were a few days away from their soft open, and they started crying on the strategy call, and they said, "You're the first person to tell me that it's possible to build a healthy coffee business, that it's possible to take a paycheck from this thing at any point, that it's possible to take a day off at any point, that it's possible that it could even break even, much less turn a profit." And so I didn't worry too much about changing their mind per se, or changing that underlying belief. If somebody really wants to hang on to a belief, I don't know if there's much I can do. But I do think that proposition of like, hey, it's possible, I do think it's inherently more attractive than the alternative. And I think there's a lot of people who they want to believe that it's possible, and they're ready, they just want to be shown how. And those are the folks that right now we're working with mostly. But a lot of times we're just one of the only ones, I guess I'll say, that are even proposing that it's possible. Because a lot of what you see in the Facebook owner groups and stuff like that is like, oh, I'm just telling you like it is. Get ready to never take a day off. Get ready to never take a paycheck. Hope you got a good nest egg saved up, because you're going to live off that and also spend that all on the coffee shop.
Yeah.
A lot of the banter and the chatter is that way, and it's all couched as being like, I'm just being honest. And that bothers me because, or that phrase, I'm just telling it like it is.
Yeah.
And I don't think, number one, that's possible. Number two, that's not helpful.
There's a lot of, when we're hiring baristas, for example, when we put out the application and it says, we want people who love people, love coffee, hard work, cleaning. Yeah. And it's a reality check in the same way that if you enter into something like this, there is an acceptable level of due diligence to say there's a trough where you're not making a profit, and then there is a level at which, if all is going well and you have accepted the reality of the acceptable difficulties, and we might even say the necessary difficulties, versus that's what I like to tell clients, is like the idea of avoiding unnecessary pain versus the stuff that's just inherent in it. It's just there. So I get, and I'm going through these threads the same as USC, like, yes, there is sort of like this bitter root. It's not just that we're saying like it is, or we're saying, hey, just so you know, but you can do it. It's more of a, don't ever try this because you can't, and you can't succeed. People succeed all the time, but if you're not balancing these things, if you just have a rampant, like, I'm going to go forward without any regard for the reality, or you're the reverse, you're not going to go anywhere on either side of the spectrum, right?
Yeah. Maxwell posted a video, the first line or so was something like, hey, have you ever thought about opening up a coffee shop? And somebody grabbed that video and sent it to me DM, and then underneath it, they just said, somebody wants to open a coffee shop, tell them don't. And then after that, their message was, save yourself some modules. And I was like, oh, my heart breaks for that person though. Like that's how you feel about the thing that you've built, is your recommendation would be don't. Oh.
Yeah. Sometimes there are people, and I've been on calls with people, I'm just like, I really don't think you should open a coffee shop.
Totally.
And then there are people who really should. They do, yeah. And there are mistakes that are made along the way. In this thing we started our conversation with, the idea of 24/7 beck and call, all that stuff, right? That's the thing that burns people out. And they're just like, I have no life.
Yeah.
And so if you would like your life, then do not do this, rather than saying, okay, let's reverse engineer it and see at which point did it go off the rails? Can we get it back on the rails? And what kind of lessons can be taught to others when they first start out to keep them on the tracks? When somebody is, let's say, first starting out with coffee, because there's these two groups. There's the people that are starting out. They have probably the most in-depth amount of resourcing that has ever existed for opening a coffee shop in the history of opening coffee shops. Coaches, consulting, books, websites, and yeah. So there's a deluge of information that makes it hard to make a decision. And then there are people who are also operating coffee shops, and they need to assess and fix what's wrong with the shop now. What would you say is the best strategy for parsing through the information to find what's right for you in the sea of solutions?
That's such a good question. And in a second, I'd actually love to hear your thoughts on that particular question. I had somebody ask me this yesterday on a strategy call, and my answer is find somebody that you connect with that can help you. I'm not saying join our small group, sign up for one-on-one coaching.
But
I'm not saying it like that. I mean, I could. Well, because I've talked with people and I've said like, they're a coffee shop. And I've even said like, hey, if you decide not to work with us, you should definitely check out Keys to the Shop, and you should definitely talk to Chris DeFerrio. And I have never asked you, actually. I'm hoping some of those people like are working with you, but I have had people come back and say like, no, we felt like we connected more with you and your style. And that's what I think is really powerful, and I think we underestimate how powerful that is.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody has questions, man, Rob Hoos is a great resource. Scott Rayo is a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
You are a great resource. Speaking of resources available, to parse through all of that, if you want to go DIY, you can. That's going to cost you time mostly.
Yeah.
If you want more of like instead of do it yourself, more like a done with you, that's where you would be a great resource. So and that's why I would say sort of blanket statement,
mm-hmm.
find somebody you connect with. If somebody listens to your podcast and they just really feel a sort of a connection with you and the way you are, your way of being and your way of speaking, I would never say, come work with us. I'd say like, you already connect with Chris, go work with Chris. But I would say work with somebody.
Yeah.
Because the amount of time you'll save, I mean, if you DIY, it costs you time. Done with you, it will cost you money. But in terms of like a return on investment, the returns we see from like small pieces of information, like, hey, here's how to think of labor, and have people come back a week later and be like, that just made me $60,000. Like, okay, cool. That return on investment is nuts. And that was just one thing we talked about over the course of, a 12-week small group or whatever. So the return on investment possible is huge.
Yeah, and because you can listen to me or you on a call or on a podcast to say anything. If you're not going to take action on it, you have to believe in order to take action. Indiana always used the analogy of Indiana Jones. I forget which movie, the Invisible Bridge.
That I think is Last Crusade.
Is it? Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. So, but it's there.
I love it.
And you just have to take that step. But you're right on the money with, it's like getting into coffee. You were hooked on that natural Ethiopian, and you needed to find a point to get a foothold, right, in the industry. So if that's the tone and tenor and, whatever about the person you're working with, if you like their smile lines better than the next person's, then so be it. And yeah, but you can't, DIY does cost you time. And I was thinking about the exponential increase on applied wisdom that you just mentioned. Like it is
chills.
Very true that your coffee machines and your grinders cost you far more than any level of coaching or consulting that you might get. And they break. Principles that are good principles are usable and evergreen. They keep going and going. So when people come to you and talk to you about, where they're at, I was thinking about the DIY thing, because defining the problem is part of the conversation that you have with people. Because initially somebody would come and say, well, I've got these problems. Well, if you or I did a site visit, often what that problem was defined as in the first conversation turns out to not to be actually the exact thing.
Yeah.
How do people approach that when they are looking for solutions in a way that allows them to find the right solutions? Because they could be barking up the wrong tree because they think their problem is, I just need better staff, and it's not actually that. It might be a shift in their own emotional capacity or the SOPs and things. So how does one figure out what direction to go on their own in order to get help in the first place?
Two things. I think good help would help you go figure out which direction to go. And that is what we end up doing mostly on free strategy calls, is even if they're not going to work with us, hopefully being helpful enough to say, like, here's the direction we would have taken you if we had worked together. But even if we don't, that's totally okay. But you're going to kind of want to be thinking in this vein as like your next right step. Oftentimes the grand solution is vague, is unclear, but the next right step is almost always, not always, but almost always crystal clear. The next right step, if we can just pause and ask ourselves, like, I don't know exactly what the end game is, but the next right step is this. Our grand business is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand.
That's deep. That's good.
And I'm blanking on who said that. It used to be on my wall, but that idea of like, I don't know, that's dimly at a distance, but there's something right in front of me that's pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to go one level deeper or one level more specific than that, I would say something you said, these principles, this actionable wisdom, there's quite a bit that has always been true and always will be true. And that's where the name Threadbare originally came from, because these ideas they're old, they're timeless. And some people would go, oh, that's passé, that's worn out, threadbare. But I don't think so. I think they're timeless. I think they're just as pertinent today as they have always been, and they will always be. So if you're like really struggling with like, I don't know what to do, doing some digging on things like timeless principles, often ancient wisdom, those, I don't mean everybody needs to go read the Gita tomorrow, but I just mean, if you think in terms of like, hey, there are things that have always been true and always will be true. Yeah. Things that every culture since the beginning of time have agreed upon. Yep, there are. So let's start there. Let's build a foundational framework of those things. And then maybe the answer to the pressing question will become a little bit more obvious.
I think the thing that you're hitting on here is the idea of your problems are not so unique.
Unique, but not so unique that there's not an answer.
And the unique nature of problems in people's minds, at least, it gets unique. And so automatically old is not a solution. Tried and true is not a solution necessarily. Well, you know what is? More syrup. and marketing takes full advantage of the idea that your problems are so unique that only 2024, 2023 solutions can fix it, where you read one book that you found in a dusty thrift shop or antiquarian bookshop, and you're like, this one sentence just changed my business. Now, how does that happen? It's a chain reaction. And not to get too metaphysical here, but there's a reason why your business principles oftentimes will help change the way that you operate within your own personal life as well, because things are connected. And once you're open to not just believing it's possible to do this with your business, but that you yourself are capable of growth. It's not just you growing your business. It's you growing with your business, which requires a lot of vulnerability. You can assess a business all day long. Show me the numbers, show the P&Ls and all that stuff. But will we open ourselves up to say, hey, timeless principles of leadership and management, if you're going to be passive aggressive with people, probably not going to work out very well. But we would rather run to, as funny as it sounds, it actually why are we proliferating all of these menu items, scattershot solutions to almost subconsciously avoid the mirror?
Yeah, that insight right there is worth so much. I love that on so many levels. Our small group coaching is a little bit more focused on the business side of things, but our one-on-one coaching is person first, business second, staff third. And it's not because staff is last or we don't care about staff. It's just I've noticed that that's the only sequence that actually sticks. And what you said about meeting with the owner as a person first and sharing with them things that will apply to their business and their personal life. I have tried it both ways. Like I've tried like, let's just get down to business. Let's just talk about staff, coffee, the business side of things. And it doesn't work. It doesn't stick. Those are the only people who have ever quit. Before Maxwell came on, I kind of sat down. I was like, okay, this is what kind of different groups of people I've worked with over the last, however many years. I found one common thread in all the people who have stayed many, many years as one-on-one clients, and then all the people who have quit. And there was one thing, and it was 100% of people who I didn't do this have quit, and 100% of people who I did this with have stayed. And it was the person first, timeless principles. Like we're going to look at you as a person and your life as a whole, and we're going to put the business underneath that umbrella instead of flipping it around and just getting down to business. And I'm mostly just rephrasing everything you just said, but to communicate how deeply what you said resonates with me, at least.
It's so true. Yeah. And because business is personal in a lot of ways. There's limits to what you can do in terms of having that. You need to have some boundaries in business, of course, but it's not so neatly compartmentalized.
Well, and to kind of loop it back to something you said earlier, which I absolutely agree with, the premise of the staff versus owner mentality, or the factions, I think you called them, which I think is an apt description. The premise of that is that we're mostly different, but I don't think that's even accurate. But even if it's accurate, I don't think it's helpful and useful. We're people first, and that is a lot. Like if you pie chart that out, what we have in common is so much more than what we have in opposition to one another. So to create, and it's not that we're the same, just like no coffee business, no cafe is the same, but you pie chart it out and healthy coffee businesses are like 99% identical.
Yeah.
And people are genetically speaking, human to human, we're like over 99% the same. But I don't mean it just on a pure genetic level. I just mean like our shared humanity is so much more than whatever divides us or makes us different. And I think that's a much more helpful foundational framework to have a conversation about, hey, like the way we've structured this isn't good for the staff. Guess what? It's also terrible for the owner, probably. Like nobody's winning that game, but it's not us versus them. It's more like, hey, we're all in this drowning boat together, or sinking boat, I guess. Boats don't drown. But when we're all in a sinking boat together, to go like, hey, this sucks more for us than it does for them. We're all about to go under here. So our shared status in terms of like our shared human experience, I think is a much better springboard. So I don't like the us versus them, the factions mentality, partially because I just think our shared humanity it needs to be given a little bit more weight. Our shared personhood is a common footing that we can build quite a bit on if we start there. You
retain a lot of uniqueness in the sense that there's that 1% difference. I mean, just coffee tastes different.
Yeah.
The same way it's 99% water or something, but
yeah,
that little percentage difference in the origin and all that stuff, it tastes way different. And so you can enjoy it that way. So you don't need to worry about, being so unique. At the same time, it is sort of like we're all in this together. We don't like factions, but leadership is leadership because it has to take the first step. Sometimes that is going to suck more because you have to swallow your pride, and if let's say you're in a position where you have factions, where people might assume that you're like rolling in it and all this stuff, people do. How do you create a different narrative while at the same time taking the first step and realizing that you're not going to be fully understood right away? It's going to take time,
Yeah. And being misunderstood is one of my personal fears. And I hear a lot of owners express that as well. I don't mind if I feel like somebody understands what I said and disagrees with me, I don't mind. But if I feel like they misheard me and disagree with what they thought I said, it rips me apart inside. And that's one of those things that goes in the bucket that you were describing earlier of like, that is actually a hardship that is part of being in leadership, is part of being an owner, is being willing to still wade in, even though you don't feel understood, so I often feel like people put almost too many things in the bucket of like, that's just what it is. It's just part of being an owner. I feel like they often put too many things in that bucket, and they do things like they don't turn a profit or they don't take a paycheck, but they put it in that bucket of like, well, that's just coffee business. That's just leadership. Mm-hmm. So I like to take things out of that bucket in general. But one of the things I probably would leave in that bucket is people will not fully understand you. People will not fully get where you're coming from. I do find it helpful to look at it through for a second, an evolutionary biology lens. So the brain has a negative assumption default. If I don't tell you in this conversation, if I don't tell you why I did something, the brain's default is to fill that blank space I just left with a negative assumption.
Yeah.
Going back to like foraging for berries in the forest, if a bush rustles, it's safer to assume that's a tiger that might eat me. It's not super wise to assume it's a bunny that would like to be hugged, or like Elf, Will Ferrell's Elf, when he's like, the raccoon's like, do you need a hug? And the raccoon attacks him. It's safer to assume negative intent. It's safer. It's not better. And I feel like we won't be understood, and people will tend towards negative assumptions about us as owners. Accepting that to a degree, and then also doing our best to not leave too much blank space in terms of like, hey, we're giving you a raise. Tell them why.
Yes.
Hey, we're closing earlier. Tell them why. Don't leave a blank space, because they'll fill it with the most negative possible assumption.
Yeah. And
that, I think, just is human brain wiring. I don't think it's your staff is terrible. I don't think you accidentally hired a bunch of terrible humans. I think that's how the brain works. So kind of twofold, to answer your question slightly more succinctly. There's an acceptance of like, I'm not going to be understood. That's a part of this. And an ownership of like, I'll do the best I can to like fill any blank spaces with explanations of like why we decided to do this to the best of my ability.
There's delayed gratification in all of this too, where if you expect, like at the end of an assessment report or something, I might say, this is about a year or 2 year process of turnover from one version to the next.
Yeah.
At absolute minimum, especially if you've been in business for a long time. If you're thinking about wanting the ROI, sort of like a congratulatory proof of the effort that you mustered in that week, let's say there's a week where you apply certain principles that these timeless wisdom principles that Michael has talked to me about, and I'm applying them, and I don't see the fruit from that, I'm just going to throw it out, right? It's way too early to judge that. Now, somebody might say, well, that's easy for you to say. Now we'll never know if your consulting is effective. No, it's it really is true, though, that if you're plowing up fallow ground, if you're watering, you have to give time for these things to start to show the fruit. And then you can really start to see that this is not only working, but is true. Because working and true are kind of different. Because something could work for a moment. You could get people in because you do BOGO, sandwich coffee stuff. That's working.
Frappuccino happy hour.
Yeah, exactly. But true and sustainable might be different than that. So
I love that.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's something that you're also letting people know, that it's like it's a time issue that you need to have a little bit of delayed gratification. How do you frame that for people?
I mean, just your ability to like zero in and isolate that and express that in words is so powerful. I have come up against the same thing. One of the reasons why Christine and I love homesteading so much, like planting our garden, keeping our chickens, is things happen at the pace they happen. They don't happen faster or slower. We recently got some young chickens and raised them, and I really wanted them to start laying. And you know what they did? They did it when they were good and ready and not before. And natural systems are like that. A lot of my life is disconnected from that. And so I can be tempted to view the whole world that way. Like, isn't everything speed upable? Isn't everything microwavable? No, it's not. To desire that is more of a evidence that I've become disconnected from the natural order of things more than anything else. And going back to your analogy of like, you plant a seed, you water it one day, that is insanity to expect fruit the next day. Even on a 1 year cycle, planting in the spring and watering all summer and then hopefully harvesting in the fall. The one saving grace is that you likely have seen it done before. And so there's that like, well, they did it, so it's possible. I think back to the very first person who cultivated some sort of like vegetable. And I just imagine all of the other people around them being like, you're crazy. You're crazy. Putting that thing in the ground and then thinking something's going to happen. That looks like insanity from the outside. But I do appreciate the reminder that the natural world gives us that not everything is microwavable. I'm a huge fan of efficiency and effectiveness. Huge fan. But not everything can be made to be more efficient. Some things do just take time.
And your business, we're talking about how the common humanity and similar is to a lot of businesses. This would go into the category of the unique nature of what you're creating.
Yeah.
Because you have to be a student of its growth as it happens. Children are the same. Of course, you don't know what they're going to look like, do, think, and how their voice is going to sound at different stages of life. And my son is going to be 10 this year. It's just wild.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so I feel like what you're saying is there is a level of urgency to get, not only to get help, but to be a student of what you have on your hands and to allow for some level of mystery. Now, we just got done saying we have to fill in the blanks. We have to say why. We have SOPs, we have systems, but then there's this weird idea, this insinuation that we just have to wait.
Uh-huh.
That sounds very stressful.
Well, part of the reason we have to fill in as many blank spots as we can is because there will be some we can't fill in. Mm-hmm. So do what you can because there's things that you can't explain. Do what you can because there's things you can't control.
That's good.
And that kind of takes us back to the either or thinking a lot of folks fall into. Well, I can't control everything, so who cares? Like totally hands off. Mm-hmm. No, fill in the blank spots you can because there's going to be some that you can't. I mean, COVID is maybe overplayed as the example, but in our times, you're hard pressed to find a better example of there was no way you could have filled in all the blank spots. But I saw a lot of owners go full like monk and just retreat into nothingness.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, okay, so like, yes, you can't tell them how long this is going to last. You can't tell them you can't fill in every single blank spot, but they haven't heard from you in 3 weeks, period. Nobody's seen you in 3 weeks, period. What do you think that's doing to their psychological safety, their morale, whatever you want to look at? No communication whatsoever. That's brutal. But that's kind of the other end of the spectrum. But that would be a false dichotomy as well. It's like, it's not 100% or zero. It's do what you can, but acknowledge that you can't control everything. You can't fill in every blank spot.
Well, speaking of controlling everything, as we wrap up here, I want to ask you if you could wave a magic wand, right?
Oh,
and you could have magic portafilter.
Oh yes,
would
better
create one or two changes. Let's say one change in cafes around the world. Could be the operations, could be the people. I'm really interested to hear what you would change that you think would lead to the most fruitful result.
I would define something just to put like the bullseye on the target, and then the thing that I would change, I can say the bullseye of the target, in my estimation, is to build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people. All of the people, staff, owners, no us versus them, even your suppliers, your vendors. You said the answer is more syrups, even your syrup provider. A business that takes great care of people is the bullseye of the target. If I could wave a magic steam wand, I would instill in everybody a belief that it's possible. So, and to make it visual, in my experience, even if it's listening verbal, making it visual still is really powerful for folks. So a lot of people are familiar with the idea that there's optimists and there's pessimists. And that is a false dichotomy. On one extreme is the optimist who thinks opening a coffee shop will be easy, effortless. Everything will go great. Yeah. We'll open on time, no delays in the build out. Okay. Well, anybody who's done it hopefully has figured out. On the other end of the extreme, though, is a pessimist. Nothing is going to go right. You know what? Don't open your coffee shop. What's fascinating to me is that the realist mantra is in between, but it's not any better. And the reason it's not any better is because they're all predicated on the assumption that you see things clearly and you know what's going on.
Oh, yes.
I don't know what's going on. Mm-hmm. I think I have a bead on reality, but I don't think I do. If it's helpful to think in terms of like all three of those are a posture of arrogance, I know how it is. No, you don't. Neither do I. But there's an in-between that's a level above. It's not a real word, but if you were to give it a name, it would be possibilist, optimist, pessimist, realist, but possibilist I think is way better. Robin Sharma calls it a possibilitarian. I like possibilist better, but they're all made up words because we don't really have a framework for this in our language. But if I could wave a magic steam wand, I would instill an attitude of possibilism. Mm-hmm. that it's possible to build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you, the owner, and grab hold of that and don't stop until that's the truth, until that matches reality. People say, I'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it. You won't. You'll see it once you start believing it.
That's good.
And if you can step into that and grab hold of that, and if you're going to be stubborn about something, be stubborn about that. If you're going to grab hold of something and not let go, grab hold of that it's possible. Not easy, but also not impossible. That would be the magic steam wand request or desire. Yeah.
I love that. You're going to innovate in the direction of solutions that are going to make that more achievable, right?
Oh, I love that phrase. Yeah. Innovate in the direction of solutions.
Yeah, that's good.
That's like new mantra right there. Yeah. Innovate in the direction of solutions. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Michael, this has been really fun to talk with you. And this is what you do with your clients. This is the kind of, this conversation.
That's a good point.
This conversation is the kind of thing, like if I were a coffee shop owner and I was having a conversation with you, we'd be down the road of defining what it is that is, nagging me or my business, and we'd be innovating towards solutions. So how can we stay in touch with what you're doing, what you're offering to coffee shop owners of all stripes so they can work with Threadbare?
Our Instagram is where we put most of what we're trying to create as free resources. So at Threadbare Coffee Consulting, and then Maxwell is at Maxwell Threadbare. He's got his own Instagram account. We decided that was an even better way to help, especially cafe owners who are desiring to open and already are open and running. So there's two of those. You can check out our website. It's just Threadbare Coffee Consulting. And there's like 1,000 links on there to schedule a free strategy call in hopes of making it easy and effortless if that's something you're interested in. We do small group cohorts that are specific to what part of the journey you're in to try and match people wherever they're at. So we have one, how to start a cafe is coming up here in September. And then we've been running one for roasteries that are up and running and cafes that are up and running. And the next cohort will also start in September. So yeah, the details are on our website, and following on Instagram at Threadbare Coffee Consulting is probably the best way to get, if you want to get to know us, and hopefully the goal is for it to be full of valuable mindsets, informations, foundational frameworks, timeless wisdom, as we talked about today. But more than anything, I guess, I hope our Instagram feed specifically is encouraging, and I hope it reminds people that it's possible. I find that a lot of times people don't need to be taught. They more need to be just reminded, like, hey, no, it's possible. Just hang on, keep going. You already know it's possible. I'm just here to remind you more than anything, and maybe give them a little bit more of the how to give it some teeth.
I love that. Yeah. Well, I mean, if that's your goal, I feel like you all are accomplishing that very well so far. So, Michael, awesome to talk to you as always. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been a huge honor. I appreciate your time.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you really loved that episode, and that, from this conversation, at least we're going to start having a little bit more of a patient and graceful disposition toward ourselves, and a more open-minded and open-hearted approach to the business, and believing what is possible with it, even though, because the mind, like Michael mentioned, has the tendency to fill in gaps with negativity, there is plenty to look at and say, there's possibility, there's positivity. And it's not that, negative or positive or even realist, it's the possibilities, right? And I forget what Michael said. He said the possibilist. And so that kind of brand of optimism, if you will, that is based on discovery and having a bit of a kind of a faith that what it is that you're cultivating has something to offer beyond what is visible in the moment, sounds to me like something that could really fuel your next level in coffee. And so a huge thank you to Michael Ryan for being on the show. If you're interested in working with Michael and the team there at Threadbare Coffee Consulting, then you need only go to their website, threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com, or you can look them up on Instagram and follow along with the content they post there, Threadbare Coffee Consulting. That's where you can find them on Instagram at Threadbare Coffee Consulting. Highly recommend them. And again, huge thank you to Michael. We appreciate all your work and your insights here. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback about today's episode, go ahead and send me an email. Chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can do that. And I always love hearing from you as the listeners to this show, because this show is in service to you in your careers, your businesses, your growth within specialty retail coffee and beyond. So Chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can do that. And as I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation with Michael, we both are people who have worked with, and I currently still do, with Coffee Fest, and that trade show has been going for 30 years. And that means it's 3 decades of offering what I consider maybe the best resource in terms of events and trade shows that you could possibly go to. If you're a coffee shop owner looking for clarity and an infusion of insight into various areas of your coffee shop, from finances to culture to recipes to leadership and legal strategy and that kind of stuff, there's a whole range of free or accessibly priced trainings, workshops, lectures, panel discussions, and of course there's the trade show floor. You get to interact with vendors of all sorts, and not the least of the benefits here is that there is the community. Conversations you have with people from different states, different countries, that will help you become better, And I would really encourage you to check them out at coffeefest.com. Upcoming show in Orlando is in November. You can use the code KEYS, KEYS, to get 50% off general admission. So KEYS to get 50% off general admission, and I will be there speaking. I will be judging latte art, and I will be saying hello to you, hopefully. So if you see me there, definitely introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you. And so that's going to be the end of our show, everybody. I really appreciate you joining me, as always, for these episodes. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and share Keys to the Shop far and wide. And as always, I hope that today's episode has truly given you keys to the shop.